January 1st, 1864. The army welcomed the new year with a cannon salute and the firing of muskets, accompanied by much singing and a tin or two of whiskey. Before going off to be with the officers, Lieutenant Toms raised his cup and said, "To the best, the most loyal company in the Army of the Potomac, may we be the first to enter Richmond." Sergeant Donahue stood then and said, "To you, sir, the best any company or any army can hope to have." And we all cheered and drank to this because we all believe it to be true. I am sleeping much better and have not had a visit from my dead Reb friend in days, thanks to the sleeping herbs. January 2nd. Began a letter to Miss Sarah Henderson, but after the "Dear Miss Henderson," I did not know what to say. And this was my third attempt to write her. I am not sure what will interest her. I do not think she wants to hear about chimney fires, freezing nights, or the way the measles have the doctors very busy. I will have to think very carefully on this. January 14th. Lieutenant Toms had me come to his tent this afternoon with the journal. The only other people there was Sergeant Donahue and Caesar, who unfolded a map of the region on a small table. "Corporal Please," the lieutenant began, "I want you to take careful notes of what is said here. It seems that come spring there will be a major offensive, which is not a surprise since there is always some sort of big action every spring. There would be two parts to this action. One, to draw out General Robert E. Lee's army, or some part of it. The next, to strike at the left flank of his army and get between it and Richmond." While Lieutenant Toms explained this, Caesar showed us the most likely route this force would take. At first I was startled to see him do this, and not the lieutenant, since servants, especially Negro ones, are never allowed to be part of such conversations. I must have looked odd or some such, because Lieutenant Tom stopped what he was saying and explained that in the past Caesar had been rented out by his master to work on various plantations near Gordonsville. He knows the roads better than any regular army scout, so listen when he says something about the terrain or trails or people. I said, "Yes, sir," though I still found it strange to follow Caesar's dark finger as it moved about the map. "We have been selected for a special assignment," said the lieutenant. Sergeant Donahue let out a little groan. The last time we had been given a special assignment, we trailed along after the supply train. "Don't worry, Sergeant," said the lieutenant. "We will be in the thick of it. Captain Clapp has told me we will support Major Pettit's artillery." When Lieutenant Tom said this, he was smiling, and so was Sergeant Donahue, and so was Caesar. Major Pettit is always in the fiercest part of any battle, and he is often referred to, behind his back of course, as the Merry Widow Maker, because he will hold his guns in place at any cost and seems to enjoy the added excitement. I did not like the sound of this springtime job, and if I smiled, it was probably a thin one. "Needless to say," Lieutenant Tom said, "this is to be kept secret. Not a word, not a hint to anyone, not even to those at home. I want you to know because we will begin training with Major Pettit, and the men need to learn their tasks perfectly. Major Pettit does not tolerate mistakes. And Corporal Pease," the lieutenant turned to face me directly, and he looked extremely serious, "keep that journal on your person at all times. I don't want anyone to know what is going to happen." Yes, sir," I said, a bit startled. You see, my mind had wandered a little. Cannons are the prime targets in any battle, and I was picturing what it would be like being near them during an all-out shelling. "It will never leave me, sir." "Good," he said. Then from the table drawer he took two small pieces of fabric that turned out to be sergeant's chevrons and handed them to me. "You will be needing these from now on." I looked at what he placed in the palm of my hand, blinked, and must have looked confused. He broke into another broad smile and said, "Congratulations, Sergeant Pease." He shook my hand, and so did Sergeant Donahue and Caesar. "But what about Corporal Drake, sir?" I asked. "He is in line next." "He is also being promoted, but he is still too weak from his illness. Besides, we will need 3 sergeants when we begin this training." "But there are other men, sir, who are older and deserve to—" But he waved my objections aside and said, "I gave this a lot of thought, Sergeant. You are the best man to be 3rd sergeant now. Sergeant Donahue needs help, especially with the record-keeping chores. He will explain what your new duties will be." Yes, sir," I stammered again. Thank you, sir." "No need to thank me, Sergeant. You earned those." He paused here, then added, "But do me a favor, Sergeant. No more charging the enemy on your own. You make the rest of us seem like laggards." He and the other men laughed very loudly at his joke, and I did too. A little. Then Caesar produced a bottle of whiskey and 4 glasses, and we all had a drink. I was still stunned at my promotion, happy about it, and a little scared by the new responsibilities, and occasionally, in my head, not out loud, saying the words, "Sergeant James Edmond Pease," to hear how it sounded. Then a troubling thought entered my head. One important duty of a sergeant is to be the first to stand when a charge is called to urge the rest of the men on. It is a little like wearing a red shirt with a great white X drawn on the chest for all those Rev sharpshooters to see. January 15th. Took some good-natured ribbing about being made sergeant from the rest of the boys last night, but most seem happy for me. This morning was my first real test. I called roll, which was not very hard because I know the men. When I said "Shelp," he did not answer at all, but stood there in the front row with his arms folded across his chest, acting bored. I called his name again, and there was still no answer. Some of the boys giggled, thinking it good sport to play with the new sergeant, but the look on Shelp's face said he was not playing. I tried his name a third time, and got an answer, but from another man who said, "Here," in a very high voice. This produced a great roll of laughter from the company, and I felt my face flush red. I was about to shout something at the one who had answered, and at Shelp when I remembered Sergeant Donahue's words. "Don't let them get under your hide. If they see they can upset you, they will never let you alone." So instead I looked at the roster and said, "Private Shelp is not here, I guess, and is absent without permission." Everyone knew what that would mean. Anyone reported absent without permission would be put in the cold stockade for a day or two with little to drink or eat, and might possibly be given an aromatic chore, such as the one given Theron Chrysler. Brower Davis said, "But he is right in front of you, Sergeant." "I did not hear him answer when I called his name," I said. "So he is not here as far as I am concerned. And I don't want to hear any more comments, either." I went to mark Shelp absent when I heard his voice. "Here," he said in a very sullen way, then added, "Sergeant Jonah boy." "You will call me Sergeant Peace, Private, or do you want to be on report for that too?" There was a low murmur from the company, I think because they felt I was being too harsh on Shelp for such a little thing. But it was not a little thing. Not to me. And I wanted Shelp to know it right off. After a moment of silence, Shelp replied, "No, Sergeant. Please, I don't." His voice did not have a minnie's ball weight of respect to it, but I had gotten him to answer, so I went on with roll call. Later I noticed that back in our tent Johnny and Washington was both unusually quiet and uneasy around me, so I was glad when Lieutenant Toms told me that there was to be a meeting with Major Pettit. 7 o'clock. We spent the day with Major Pettit and his aides learning how he wants his battery supported by soldiers. He had a battery of light artillery, 6 cannons in all, set out in the drill field, fully manned, with K, A, and C companies in support. Usually this kind of instruction would be carried out by one of Major Pettit's aides, but there he was in person with his aides looking on. We stood with them on a nearby hill, so we had a clear view of the men's movements. "Watch how and where they move," Major Pettit instructed us. "In battle, there will be 50 to 75 guns under my command, but you will be assigned to support just 6. Tell your men to stay low when they are in front of my guns, or they will lose their heads. And be quick when you move. My guns fire to a rapid count, sometimes every 30 counts, and if you are not down when the count is ended, we will not halt the firing. Do you understand?" We did. He was also very particular that we cover his flanks and rear carefully, as it is difficult to move hot guns, and he did not want to redirect fire unless it was absolutely necessary. The rebels lost more men than they could replace last year, so they will not be making so many costly head-on charges. "That was some show," Lieutenant Toms commented afterwards as we went back to our tents. "What did you learn from it?" "To move quickly and without hesitation," Sergeant Donahue said. "To stay low," I answered. "Very low." I am going to end this now and write a letter to Miss Sarah Henderson so I can share my good news with someone who does not wear a uniform and who is not angry with me. I have not been very successful in writing her before, but now I have something real to say, and I think I will tell her that I have kept her letter in my vest pocket ever since I received it. January 22nd. Things still seem strained with the company. I asked Sergeant Donahue about this, and he said some are probably angry because they was not made sergeant. Some probably think I am acting high and mighty when I give an order, and some just don't like anyone who is not a private. Don't worry about those people, he told me. They are not worth a bit of thought. Your real friends will always be there. Sometimes, he added, the men do not know how to act, so they become quiet around anyone who has gotten a promotion. They need to see how you act with them before they can feel comfortable. So I will try to remain calm and see what happens. Drilling with the artillery battery has begun, and Lieutenant Tom seems pleased, so I guess we are doing the job, though it all looks very confused from where I am. The only unusual incident came when Major Pettit reviewed his batteries and support and said, Lieutenant Toms, your company is the shabbiest I have seen in a while. Lieutenant Tom stood tall and said, It has never gotten in the way of their fighting, sir. And then he added, We have not been on the receiving end of such supplies since Gettysburg, sir. Oh, that, Major Pettit said, looking annoyed. He turned to one of his aides and said, Captain, these men are under our care now. See that they are outfitted properly. The next day, like magic, a supply wagon rolled up to our tents with fresh uniforms and boots. I will be glad to be rid of both my old uniform and hat, as the bullet holes are sore reminders of a close call. Too bad I can't get a new book to replace this one. It has more history about it than I want to recall. February 2nd. Decided to begin again with the brief histories, hoping this would put the men at ease. I began with Osgood Tracy, because I knew he had a birthday coming up. Osgood said he was born during a terrible blizzard, and that his father, who was a surgeon, delivered him and took care of his mother, who had been in labor a long time. Osgood never went to school, except for a few years early on, and a year in medical college, but was taught at home by his father and his mother, who spoke 6 languages between them, including Greek and Latin. He said that they spoke a different language at every meal, and that as far as he is concerned, chicken tastes best in French. When the call came to enlist, his father signed on as a surgeon, and is now the brigade surgeon for the 1st New York Light Artillery. Osgood left school when he heard about his father's enlistment and signed on himself, but as a regular soldier. Osgood also told me that most of the doctors he has encountered in the army, excepting his father, of course, are not fit to lance a boil, let alone treat someone seriously hurt, and that most men die from the care that they get and not their wounds. This is something most soldiers already know, and is why we avoid the doctors at all costs. But Osgood said I should write it into our company history, so everyone will know. February 12th. Major Pettit has us drilling just about every day, with the cannons often firing blank cartridges and other companies playing the rebs. Some of our company are beginning to complain, saying they already know how to fight. But fighting under the barrels of cannons with the deafening noise and blinding smoke is a different sort of fighting. Although not dangerous in the least while they are firing, I can assure you it is very disagreeable, for the concussion of the air almost crushes a person to the ground. So we needed to be out there to get used to the feeling, and learn and hear and obey orders. I said all this to the men, and Shelp had to answer back, And how did you come to know this and the rest of us not? I felt instantly annoyed by his words, probably more so than I should have, and I was recalling Sergeant Donohue's advice not to respond too quickly to a taunt when another man, William Zellers, who was not a grumbler, said, He has seen as many fights as you, Charlie, and been wounded too. And, another pointed out, he has meetings with the major and lieutenant. They don't make him an expert, Shelp said. I didn't say I was an expert, I said matter-of-factly. But this isn't charging the enemy head-on or sniping at him from behind trees. We need to move around more quickly to protect the guns. It is all a lot of dancing to me, Shelp said, but he wasn't challenging me directly. I think because most of the men, even the grumblers, knew I was right about this. Give me a good old fight any time, Shelp added. I knew that our generals aimed to give him his wish, but I could not say so. Received a second letter from Miss Sarah Henderson. In my letter to her, I had mentioned my unease at keeping the company journal, and in reply, Sarah, for she told me I should call her Sarah, sent a silver coin that her great-grandfather had carried during the War of Independence. He was only 15 when he joined the state militia, and in 6 years of fighting he never received even a scratch. I am not sure about the value of good luck charms, but I think I will keep this letter and its coin with the other. That way I will not disappoint Sarah. February 14th. Many of the boys in the company are rereading letters and heaving deep sighs. I began to write to Sarah, and Johnny saw what I was doing and said, Sarah will think you were in love with her. But he was laughing, so I know he did not intend it in a mean way. Even so, I felt myself blushing and had to play with the fire till this passed. Sergeant Drake has returned to the company, and Miles Gorham will replace him as corporal. February 22nd. I am not sure what to make of this day. We had been running mock battles all day, with K and E companies charging from various positions. I was running back and forth between Lieutenant Tom's and our men with orders and changes in orders when a spark from the hot guns must have gotten into a caisson, because it suddenly exploded and I was the nearest to it. I pulled up straight. I did not even have enough wits about me to duck down, and one of the wheels flew by my head not more than 2 feet away, followed by bits of wood and metal and such. I did kiss the ground about then, helped by a rush of hot air, and received a pelting of dirt, rocks, and other pieces of the caisson. I glanced up, amazed I still had my head on my soldiers, and I noticed that a few of the men had paused in what they was doing to look in my direction, but not many, and not any of the men at the guns, which still fired away, even though 2 of the cannoneers had been hit by parts of the caisson too. The men still played their parts as if nothing unusual had happened. "Move, Sergeant Pease! If you are not dead, move!" That was Lieutenant Tom screaming at me. I jumped up and ran as if the devil himself was chasing me, and I must have been a sight, because I was covered with debris and spitting out dirt. But the orders was delivered and our company responded. A few minutes passed during which I contained my curiosity, but eventually I had to glance around. Where there had once been a caisson was now a large hole, big enough to bury a man in, and not much else. When I looked to where Major Pettit was, he was still seated on his horse, observing the action. I would wager any amount that he did not even blink when the caisson went up. Later, back at camp, I heard Shelp's voice. "I tell you, bad things follow him everywhere." He did not use my name, but I didn't think he had to. Johnny said I certainly was the luckiest man in the army. So there are 2 views of me. Sergeant Donahue said I had acted well considering what had happened, and I told him I had just jumped at the sound of Lieutenant Tom's voice. That is what any good soldier does. He moves when ordered. That's what the men will do for you, too. I wish I could believe what the sergeant said, but I am not so sure many of the men will ever jump at my voice, or that I will live long enough to give many orders. The only bright spot is that today I received a 3rd letter from Sarah, and Johnny said, "She is sweet on you, Jim. I can tell." I would write her a letter about my day, but my head hurts painfully, so I will boil up the last of my sleeping herbs and try to rest instead. But I will keep the words, "She is sweet on you," in my head. February 25th. Major Pettit has us learning how to load, aim, fire, and maneuver the light artillery, as well as all commands. You should know the procedures, he explained, so you can fill in when any of my men are wounded or killed. The little professor noted that the use of the word "if" would have suggested that something might happen, while the word "when" means it will certainly happen. It is sometimes hard for me to recall that I joined this army to get a pair of boots and dinner. Now look where I am. Head no longer hurts, though I am still wary around the caissons when the guns are hot. A sound sleep is once again hard to find. Approached Niles Rogers about a brief history, but he said his throat hurt and I should ask his tent mate, Philo Olmsted. Philo grew up in Belvedere, New Jersey, where his father was an undertaker. One summer we had a fever that carried off a lot of folk, and we buried a good part of the town. When the fever passed, the town was mostly young, and there wasn't much business for my father, and we had to leave. So we traveled into New York and didn't stop till we came to a town with a lot of old people. Business has been good ever since. Despite his background, Philo is a very merry soul and is always ready to laugh. When I asked him why he didn't go into the burying business, he said, "It's usually steady work, but I prefer to deal with my neighbors when they can talk back, so I became a carriage maker." Sent a brief letter to Sarah, telling her about my near miss. Johnny said he was going to write Sarah and say that I pined for her so much that the earth shook and exploded under my feet. I then ordered Johnny not to write about the incident. So being a sergeant has some advantages.